Welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, episode 498. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility through this podcast since 2005. Today, we're talking with therapist Linda Carroll about the 5 stages of lasting love, the value of the pause, and 3 magic words to help us with communicating. For those of you new to the podcast, a big welcome and a reminder that you can subscribe in your favorite podcast app, such as Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Overcast. And I have links in the show notes, which can be found at kimberlywilson.com/498. Also, we have a podcast app so you can have all nearly 500 episodes on your phone with you at all times. All right, so as I promised, I am so excited to share with you the upcoming 500th TDJ Podcast Soirée, and it is happening on Sunday, August 2nd, from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and of course, you are invited. Now, over in the show notes, you will find a link to grab your spot to join us in celebration. And there's also, if you head on over to the blog, kimberlywilson.com/blog, there's also a questionnaire, a survey. I would love your feedback on what would make this particular podcast special to you, because I know many of you have been listening for nearly 15 years. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, a super duper big thank you to those of you who joined the mid-year retreat that happened over the weekend. Thanks to your support, we raised $500 for Higher Heights for America. They're building the political power and leadership of Black women from the voting booth to elected office and creating the environment for Black women to run, win, and lead. Also, it was such a treat to be able to sit down with everyone and to do a little reflection on what 2020 has meant for us. I mean, it has been quite the year, right? So to think about lessons learned, highlights, things along those lines. And then we also did some dreaming on what do we want the rest of the year to look like, from incorporating the 32 tranquility tools, which those can be found, of course, over in the Day Book or Tranquilology or Year of Tranquility. A lot of my books, I talk about these various tranquility tools. And then also looking at healthy habits, coping skills, and then an action plan of what do we want the rest of 2020 to look and feel like. So again, a big thank you to those of you who were able to join in person and of course those of you with us in spirit. Now I'm so excited to share this podcast with you. So let's jump in. Linda Carroll is the author of Love Skills and Love Cycles. While she's worked as a therapist and couples coach for over 3 decades and has acquired numerous certificates and degrees along the way, she says that her own 35-year marriage is the primary source of her knowledge when it comes to cycles of love. She lives in Corvallis, Oregon, and you can find her at lindacarroll.com. Welcome, Linda.
Hi.
So what led you to write Love Skills, the keys to unlocking lasting, wholehearted love?
Well, that's a big question. But I think I'll do the short answer. The short answer is that I've been teaching love skills for 25 years under different formats. And so after my book Love Cycles came out, I decided that I would use the workbook that goes along with the class. And as I started to write the workbook, it kind of took its own form. And I know you're a writer, so you probably know just what I mean. I thought it was going to be a very sort of hands-on workbook where people would open it and they'd fill out forms, and very much like the class that I offer. But actually, it didn't write itself, of course, but as I started to write about the sort of some of the processes, I found myself, first of all, trying to give examples. So of when I'm talking about not listening, I'm talking about listening, of course, but to do that, I have to talk about what gets in the way. So I'm giving examples of a conversation between 2 people and showing what gets in the way. And as I start to do it like most therapists do, and I talk about, Betty and Fred, I decided I wouldn't do that. I decided I'd talk about my own relationship. And the whole book then became kind of a very self-disclosive journey of my own discovery with my partner of how to love better through skills. And I asked him how he felt about it. He said, as long as you're accurate, I don't care, because he knows I can exaggerate. He said, go for it, do it. So it became a different kind of book. It became a very personal book, along with all of the things that I've been teaching for 3 decades now.
Yeah. And so one of the things you talk about in the book is the wave is not the ocean. So can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah. The overarching theme of my work now in the past few years has been adding the whole process of mindfulness with all of our interactions. And so the book is, just good even if you're not in a relationship. But part of the mindful practice is, as we go into each interaction, to accept that it's a moment, and that sometimes we have, like, one of the things I talk about is that sometimes the urgency of talking to our partner about something is not connected to the wisdom. It's just we feel urgent because we've got a big feeling, but it might be the wrong time. The wave of not the ocean is not the ocean. It enters into that because in mindful practice, a wave is a big feeling that comes up, whether it's a reactivity, whether it's fight, flight, or freeze, or some desire to move in a direction that it doesn't come from just our brain and our heart. It just comes from our heart. The wave of not the ocean is a reminder to take a pause, even when it feels counterintuitive, to take a pause and let yourself know what's really going on.
I love that. And I have a question for you about that in a moment, too, because I love this idea of taking the pause. One of the things you talk about, and of course it circles back to your first book, are the 5 stages of lasting love. So can you kind of walk us through these?
Sure. The first stage is the merge. We all know about the merge. It's mediated by chemicals and hormones. When we fall in love, we have brain changes. And what's really, it can be a very delicious stage. But, nature breeds for diversity, not relationship compatibility. That's to quote Pat Love, a teacher of mine. And that when we are attracted to someone, it doesn't mean that's necessarily a person we should be with. So what I talk about in that stage in terms of the pause is enjoy the feelings, but don't run off to New York and follow that person without pausing and really reflecting, is this the right thing for me? You need much more time. So the merge is the falling in love, and it's a feeling. And one of the things I say throughout the book is love is a feeling, but a healthy relationship is a skill set. In stage 2, what happens is as the chemicals recede, we begin to get into what I call in loops, the ongoing loop. Some people call that the power struggle, where the very things we fell in love with begin to annoy us. And nowhere but in a pandemic does this become more exaggerated. My partner, 35 years ago, I'd love to be on a desert island with you. Well, here we are. And we're all on desert islands with each other, those of us that are in a relationship. And the differences become under a microscope. The ways that that fall in love with somebody who is, an introvert falls in love with an extrovert. And it's all juicy and delicious at the beginning. And as we move into the power struggle, the introvert wants time alone, the extrovert wants connection. And now that we're in the quarantine life, that becomes even more exaggerated. And so the power struggles, put us into kind of a place of doubting. Is this the right relationship? We have this idea that euphoric stage is going to last forever. It doesn't, and it shouldn't, because this is where we get to do the best work. The third stage is when we've been in the power struggle a long time and really become disillusioned. In stage 1, we notice everything that's right. In this third stage, we notice everything that's wrong. And so there's challenges in each of these that I talk about, and stretches, and often compare our relationship at this point, which seems so imperfect, with all of the visuals and all of the cues we get culturally from social media, all the happy, perfect people. And so the stretch there, of course, is to keep trying to find balance about what's working and what isn't. Stage 4 is a decision. I don't want to stay in this pain or estrangement or shut off place forever. What are we going to do? Or this ongoing bickering. We make a decision that we either leave the relationship, stay how it is and go into parallel lives, or do the work and to try to understand how we got stuck. And couples often come to me in this stage, which is I'm not in love with my partner anymore. We don't have sex. We're fighting all the time. And if they're not in danger and if it's not clear, I mean, sometimes it's just over, but other times people want to get out of the power struggle. It's really not the relationship. It's where they're stuck in the relationship. And so I say, what if we do the work? What if we take some time? I teach you some new skills you didn't learn, just like I didn't learn them. Use those skills and see what happens. And so often people say, I didn't really want to be out of it. I just wanted out of the trouble. And when they get out of the trouble, then sometimes the relationship gets a whole new birthing. Whatever happens, though, if you do the work and you learn the skills, everything changes in your life. The 5th stage is wholehearted, which is coming from a whole heart. And it doesn't mean that you are always in love or that you don't have good boundaries or that you don't have arguments, but it means that there's a way that you know how to find your way back to who you are over and over again. And you come from well-being. Your decisions come from wellness. I was just talking to a woman who really doesn't want to be in her relationship and her husband's doing all kinds of very, very destructive things. She said, I'm just scared to be alone. So we've been working on her wholeheartedness so that she can make a boundary with him, that if he doesn't stop this behavior, she can't stay. And not because she wants to be in the relationship, but the truth of it is that she's in there from neediness, not wholeness. So wholeness or wholeheartedness is not a space that we live from. It's a space we get to, like consciousness or mindfulness or unconditional. Those are moments that we get to, I call it the top of the mountain, and we don't stay there. But when you have really touched wholeheartedness and know it, and know how to work with what gets in the way of wholeheartedness, you know how to find your way back again and again. So those are the 5 stages. And I think wholeheartedness is why we're here, really, in the world, is to remember our wholeness and discover it.
Right. I feel like that could be a whole other book for you. The Path to Wholeheartedness.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, you've got a whole chapter dedicated to the Enneagram, right? And I know so many people are obsessed with the Enneagram. So can you tell us how this shows up and has, meaning, of course, within relationships?
Yes, I think one of the most important lessons that we have to learn in our relationship, and I started with that juicy, mergy state where you feel like you're with your other half, is recognizing that your partner isn't you. And therefore, they see the world in a different way. And most of the time, it's not wrong. I just did a whole Zoom talk for people about how different isn't wrong. And that it's really coming out now when people are pretty much locked in together. One person wants to listen to the news all day because that makes them feel secure. The world's still here. The other person maybe will read the headlines and doesn't want to listen to the news at all. Who's wrong? Nobody's wrong. And so that one person wants to talk all the time about what they're feeling. Another person wants to read and not process very much. The Enneagram is a way of managing one of the issues that goes on in those power struggles, which is you have a different lens than I do. You have a different lens. And for example, I have a lens as what's called a 7, is I see the world of possibilities. And my husband sees the world of limitations. He likes things the same all the time. I like things different. And understanding the Enneagram is we have so much more respect and tolerance for differences. If I want to change something and he says, no, I want to do it the way we always did it, I don't think he's rigid. Or if he doesn't say you're so impulsive, I know that that's his lens, that's his style, and he sees mine as being not wrong. I see his as being not wrong. And there you eliminate a lot of the arguments to begin with. So I think it's a way of, and it's true for all people in our lives, that it gives us a way to talk about where we rub up against each other without making the other person bad or wrong, or ourselves.
Right, right. Yeah. It's such a popular personality test right now, right? I mean, I think it always has been, but I just feel like it's gotten a lot more attention lately of, even in the corporate world, right? Of people trying to better understand themselves and their colleagues and managers, et cetera.
I think it's because it doesn't make people wrong. It helps us see them as different. That if my attention may go to, danger, and your attention may go to adventure. And so we go on a hike, and you're immediately going to look at the tallest mountain and think, oh, let's go for it. And maybe I'm going to look at, gosh, there's a lot of places to fall off. Well, we don't have to put each other in pigeonholes that are negative. We just understand that those differences are how we are. And we can work, like all things, we work with the strength and challenge of each of our types. But it lets people talk about troubles between them in a way that doesn't come out like criticism. It's just naming differences.
Well, and of course, communication is a huge piece of relationships, right? And you have created this acronym for the 5 essential elements of mindful communication. And can you walk us through those?
Sure. And I call that, the way that I talk about that, as the pause, because that, again, we go into the most important part is being able to take a breath and to move back and to say, breathe in and breathe out. And and before I do that, let me just tell you that I think it's in my experience of being in lots of mindfulness retreats, there's often a place where in the day, the presenter will ring the bell several times, and you stop what you're doing and you take a breath in and you take a breath out. So all of the 5 skills that I list in the pause have to do with taking that pause. That's the key. So the first one has to do there's several. So number 1 would be, so listening is a really important piece of the pause, because often in our listening, what we do is we listen for bullet points, or we listen to respond. So I give a lot of help here for people to really learn how to listen. And I talk about something is the power of the and, A-N-D. That and is, and it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, which is that different isn't wrong. So instead of saying, I love you, but I love you, and I need some space today just to read. Not I love you, but. So how and can hold 2 things at the same time, and how important that is in language. The you is for undefended communication. I think, I write a lot, and I write a lot for online magazines, and I've probably written 100 articles, and 7 of them have been on defensiveness. And I have gotten more emails from people about that issue than any issue I write about. Somebody who's with a partner who's very defensive, or somebody who's very defensive themselves, so what happens is your partner says you forgot the spinach, and what you hear is, I'm a bad person, you don't love me. And defensiveness is it's a complicated topic, and I go into it a lot in the book, and I work a lot with couples with it. It's not a character fault. It's often people are more vulnerable, more empathetic, who are also defensive, but it really gets in the way. So being able to manage our defensiveness, becoming undefensive, is a very important part. The S is for speaking smartly and with intention. And how that works is that it was what I said earlier, that when I may have an urge to say something, and it's not just to say something that's upsetting to me, it's maybe something that I want to share. But if I want to bring something up with my partner, how I bring it up and when I bring it up has everything to do with how the conversation goes. So that if I'm upset about something and I just blurt out, I'm really upset, he doesn't then say, oh, good, I can't wait for you to share. he goes into a protectiveness if I start that way. But the other side of that is that, and this actually happened yesterday, something really great happened. And he was in the middle, he's doing a watercolor artist, and he was in the middle of a very complicated space. And he'd been in this for an hour. And I wanted to run and say, guess what just happened? But I knew if I went to do that, he would just sort of grunt and say, great, great, because he was focused on what he was doing. So I took care of both of us because I wanted him to be excited with me. And I have a nonprofit that I really care about. And someone sent a huge check. And I wanted him to join with me in feeling all the possibilities we could do with that money. And I wasn't going to get it. So I waited, and I didn't want to wait. But I managed myself by pausing, and I waited to start the conversation at a time where he could meet me. And the last one is emotional intelligence, that's the mother of mindfulness. It's the mother of self-awareness, is being able to understand our emotional self and having the EQ, the emotional intelligence, to look first into ourselves with what's going on in any complicated relationship we're in. So those are the 5 parts of the pause.
Yeah, beautifully pulled together because it covers so much and so little, right?
Yeah.
And the other piece that I thought was really great in the book was the 3 magic words for us to use to help with communicating. And, of course, this is a therapeutic tool also. But can you talk to us and tell us about these 3 magic words and how you have found them to be most useful for your clients and yourself?
I will. The 3 magic words are tell me more. And this is not a district attorney's questioning, as someone once said. It's really interest in what the person's saying. So, and you can't do it all the time because you'll drive each other crazy saying that, or in your life saying that. But if you, an example would be, somebody, your partner or a friend or someone you cares about tells you something that is going on that they're upset about. Like, I had a really hard day at work. And often we will comment. And again, there's nothing wrong with this. This is just, we'll go in a different direction. We'll comment with, oh, that happened to me once, or I didn't like that person anyway. Or you haven't really liked that job for a long time. If you thought about another job, we can respond in many ways. And we take the conversation back from them and go off in a different direction. However, if we say, so what happened? Well, I'm really sick of this person I'm working with. I'd love to hear more about what that's like for you. What can happen is they can actually go to a place of deep self-reflection. And that intimacy we have in the beginning of relationships where we talk all the time, it really happens because we're listening to each other. When you've been with someone a long time, you think you know what they're going to say. And this came up for me with one of my grandkids yesterday, who called me and had done something, and I knew that his parents were a little upset, and I said, what happened? And they told me, and I wanted to start to give advice, but I didn't. I said, tell me what that was for you. And I learned a whole lot, and so did my grandchild, about what was really going on for them, in this crazy quarantine. And at the end, they said, thank you so much, Grandma. I really understand this in a different way. And so that's because that's part of the listening, is tell me what you mean by that. Not what I think you mean, but what's really going on for you.
Right. Yeah. What is this all about? I mean, it makes me think too, how, it's not so much what people say or do, it's the meaning that we give it. And this is just such a great way to kind of unpack, to get more details, information without our assumptions. Now, you talk about 4 transition times that are super important throughout the day. And can you walk us through those?
Sure. Because where this comes from is so often couples will say, well, I really want to be able to have time, but I don't have the time to put into my relationship. But everybody has these times. When we first wake up in the morning, I say to people, will you take 8 minutes a day? And then I work them up to 12. If you wake up in the morning and you say hello, What did you dream about? How did you sleep? How do you feel? 2 minutes. That's all. But an exchange where you don't pick up your iPhone, you don't look at your messages, you don't go make coffee, you see the other person, just 2 minutes. Second transition is when we separate for the day. Now it's maybe we go to our own closets, but when we used to go live in the world, we'd go away from each other. And taking that moment to just say, I hope your day is great. I hope whatever it is, to recognize that we are moving apart. Third transition is when we come back together at the end of the day, that just 2 minutes, building up to 4 minutes, where we say, how was it? What worked? What's the best thing? I'm glad to see you. And then when we go to bed at night and we leave each other to go into our sleep. And that is an amazing thing that it amazes me how, and it came from my thinking about how I could live for months with my partner and we didn't see each other. We'd miss each other. I remember one day thinking, I can't remember the last time we've really connected, even though we eat together, we sleep together, but to really sit down and look at each other. We were both in very busy periods of our life, but who can't take 12 minutes a day to do that? So those are the 4 times. And there's a real practice about just taking a small amount of time can make a huge difference.
Huge difference. Yeah, so helpful. I mean, every morning, my partner and I were like, oh, how did you sleep? And it is funny whenever you say that example, it's like, it immediately connects you and like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, or do you need a nap later? Or, whatever. Or do you need me to handle the dogs instead? So it is a way to just do a nice check-in to start the day. And of course, in the day and then throughout the day.
And it really is, it takes very little time. And it's amazing how sometimes people think, well, I can't even do that. But how can you, if you don't put time into the relationship, it's like a garden. It just doesn't grow.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor. And, one of the things that I'm curious about, because there's so many good tools in this book with regard to relationships and communication, what would you say is the main message that you would like listeners of today's podcast or readers of your book to take away from love skills?
The message is a great message. Anybody can learn these. These are simple skills. They take a lot of practice. They take a lot of self-work, but anybody can pick up this book and learn the skills that will make all your relationships better. And it doesn't matter where you start. You can move far ahead by just a small amount can do great things.
And my last question for you, Linda, is the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour, right? So this idea of how do we find tranquility in our everyday? And so for you personally, what would you say is your response to finding tranquility in everyday?
I have all kinds of things I do, which is really has to do, mostly it has to do with taking the time for me. I love to read. I read all kinds of things I get in my email. I get a poem a day. I go out and I sit out and have my coffee often we have a wonderful pond, and it's a time of rebalancing myself inside. But the other thing I have, which is my big secret, is I have the most wonderful dog puppy in the world. And every morning when he wakes me up, by kissing me and getting ready for the day, there's some way that also just grounds me. If you're a person, I've read that the shelters are empty, that people have gotten pets out of them, and that if you're an animal person, maybe you're not, maybe you're a tree person or a music person, but finding that outer thing, whatever that might be, to help you balance on the inside. And we're all different. Not everybody likes to sit by a pond or read a poem, but we all have something that we can do that can help remind us that we're bigger than whatever we're in right now, and to find that place inside, which is that wholehearted place, and visit it in the morning before we start the day.
Beautifully said. And yes to fur babies. They do make such a difference, don't they?
They sure do to me. Yes.
Well, thank you, Linda, so much for being with us today, and congrats on this amazing new book, Love Skills.
Thank you. It's been really fun to talk to you.
Over in the show notes, again at KimberlyWilson.com/498, you can find links to Linda's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, books, and a video. You'll also find a link to join our Tranquility du Jour Insiders Facebook group where you can share resources, get inspiration, make connections, and be part of the online book club. We are right now reading Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Also, a reminder, if you would like a little dose of love in your inbox weekly, and when you sign up, you get access to a TDJ sampler, which has those tranquility tools that I mentioned, along with all sorts of treats to kind of help you get started on your Tranquility du Jour journey. There's also a link to my 6 books and planner, ways to follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, a link to Tranquility, my locally sewn eco-friendly fashion line, and then also a request if you have a moment to share a review of this podcast on iTunes or any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads. I will send you a sparkly Paris postcard as a thank you. And there's all sorts of information on this at KimberlyWilson.com/review. So my hope is that this helps other people find more tranquility in their lives. Wishing you a wonderful week ahead, and I cannot wait to celebrate the 500th episode with you on Sunday, August 2nd, live through Zoom. Namaste.